Now, as I have told you, there are major two sources of evidences. So first is the archaeological source and second is your literary source. Now, what is meant by archaeological source? Now, we find some of the evidences from the caves, we find some of the evidences from the temple, we find some of the evidences from the coins, we find some evidences from the inscriptions. So it tells something about the life that was previously lived by these people. It tells about their social life, how they behaved with each other. Now, whenever you visit the ancient temples, that time you will see some of the motifs, some of the structures that are created. They are talking to each other. Okay, there are some idols. Now, what does this tells us? What does this signifies us? It signifies what are the stories from the ancient history. It tells us about how did people lived in the groups, what activities they carried out at the functional level, at the daily level, what were the essential elements of their daily livelihood, what did they wear, how did they administer their society. It tells anything about this. Okay, and the second form of evidence is the literary sources. Now, here the image tells us about the archaeological sources. See the pillars. Now, these pillars of the stupa has many of the idols or many of the sculptures, which tells us about the social life, which tells us about the administrative life during that period. Similar case is for the caves wall. Now, there are also some of the evidences from the Stone Age man. So, how do we get to know that Stone Age man used to live in the caves? Because they have created some or the another activity on the walls of the caves, which reflects their ideas, which reflects their imagination, which reflects their reality during their period. Although some are decipherable, some are not. Because if you see the script, okay, if you see the literary sources which we get from the Indus Valley Civilization, they are not in any Devanagari form or Sanskrit form. They are in the pictorial form, and that is why it is unable to decipher. But yes, it is very clear that they used to follow some or the another kind of literature, which nobody up till now has able to decipher it. Okay. Now, these are some of the elements of their script, which has been found on the walls of the caves, or the walls of on the coins or the seals. Okay, so if you see the images of these coins or the sculptures, you will find all these images are pictorial in nature. That is, there are not single alphabets. Okay, they are pictorial in nature, and that is why it becomes difficult to decipher them. What actually they were about to say, we are not able to decipher them, because these were the symbols, these were the pictorial forms, and what did they signify, we are unaware of that. And that is why Indus Valley Civilization evidences are not known up till the date. Okay, now you will ask, ma'am, how do we know that this script is from Indus Valley Civilization? So there is scientific method from where we say or analyze that this particular period is from this particular before common era or after common era. Okay, and one of the most important activity that is done to decipher or to analyze that what was the period of this or what was the period of this art. So one of the scientific activity is reading it through the spirals of the bark. The more number of spirals on the tree bark, it is more aged, and it tells about the period. It tells about the period from where we derived this history, or what is the evidence speaking about this period. Okay, now it has been possible only due to some of the natural evidences which we have today. And on this evidences, we divided our evidences into two forms. First is archaeological form, that is the pillars, inscriptions, sculpture, coins, idols, caves, walls, and the second is literary sources. Now, literary sources are again in the two form. One form is religious literary sources and second is secular literary sources. Now, what are religious literary sources? If you take the example of Buddhism, okay, so Abhidhamma, okay, so after that Jainism wala also, so all these are religious texts, okay. And if you take some of the evidences of the secular literary sources, that is either they would be talking about some of the administration, some of the polity, some of the social life, economic life, but they won't be talking about any particular religion. So those scripts are known as the secular scripts. For example, Harshacharita. Okay. For example, Harshacharita by Banabhatta. You can also take some of the examples of Kalidasas and all. So these are secular texts. Why? Because they are not tilted towards a single religion. Okay, they tells us about the political life. How was the administration going? Now, literary sources also has evidences from the local people as well as from the foreigners. Now, if you see Megasthenes, if you see the example of Megasthenes which is given in your NCERT. Now, Megasthenes wrote Indica. Okay, Megasthenes wrote Indica. And he talked about n number of evidences that were from that period. Take the second example of the foreign traveler. Hyun-sung. Now, he was a Chinese traveler. Now, he lived in Indian subcontinent for the period of 15 years. Now, although he came, now this, let's take an example. This is the Indian subcontinent. Okay, he came from the Silk Route. Okay, first he went to Pataliputra. Okay, after that he went to the Calcutta or today's West Bengal. After that Assam, and then the Gujarat, and to the Daimabad Maharashtrian site, and then again to the Pallava period. So all the evidences during this period. Now this is the site at UP. Okay, he talks everything about the Mauryan period. Okay, when he went there, he wrote the text. Nalanda University and all. Okay, now after when he came here, he talked about the economy. He talked about the trade. When he came here, he talked about the culture. He talked about the agriculture. When he came here, he talked about the Pallavas. So, whatever he came, he observed, he wrote in his book. Okay, he wrote in his book, and that is why we get some of the evidences. Okay, what was the condition during that period? Now, Hyun-sung was an author. Although he was not a court author, he was a traveler. But if you will take the Banabhatta or the Kalidasa, they were the court authors. Okay, so there are two types of authors, foreign authors and the court authors. That is the domestic or the local authors and the foreign authors. So we get n number of evidences from this things, from this evidences, archaeological sources. Fine. Now, when we talk about the archaeological sources, we first need to we first need to ensure that these were the scripts, okay, whether in literary, whether in archaeological survey, these were the scripts that were printed or that were carved during the ancient times. Okay, whether Mauryan, whether during the Magad period, everything. Okay, so these were carved in either Pala language or the Sanskrit language. But the inscription or the script that was before this was the pictorial script. Pictorial script, which we can't decipher, and this is it. Now this pictorial script, see, this figure is of a human, okay? This figure is of any stone tool, okay? Now see, this figure, okay, this figure is of the plow, okay? This figure represents something different. Now some of the figures also represent the animals. Some of the figures tells us about the fish. So there are evidences that these people knew the fishery sector. These people knew how to trade on the river side or on the sea side. We come through this conclusion, through all these evidences brought out by the script. But yet we can't decipher it. Why? Because they are pictorial in nature. But if we see the archaeological evidences, we clear-cut have the images that tells us about something about that period. Now this image tells us about how the cooking was performed in a particular family, how everyone was involved in the activities, home-related activities. Now here, the male person are also cooking and the female person is also cooking. So it reflects the equality, gender equality during that time. It tells something about our social life during this period. Now beyond this, you need to know clearly about the timeline. Now, as this is the beginning of our ancient history, first your pillars needs to be very strong. If your pillars are strong, you will very well able to put everything on the place. Okay. Now, the history started right from 2 million BCE. Okay. We are talking about the lower Paleolithic period, when the Stone Age man was completely dependent upon the nature for his food, for his living and everything. After that, we have seen the Middle Paleolithic and Upper Paleolithic. In Upper Paleolithic and the beginning of the Microlith period, we have seen that Stone Age man had developed the stone tools. That is, it started to curve or to take the age for the stone tools. He also developed some of the innovative things in the agriculture during the Neolithic and the Chalcolithic period, especially the emergence of the plow. Okay, so here in this condition, we can say that during the Neolithic and the Chalcolithic, firstly, they started to harvest any food grain or the crop, right? Second, they started to render or to follow the animal husbandry. And after that, during the Chalcolithic period, they started to firstly use the copper metal. Okay, and in the Iron Age, so they started completely using the iron. Okay, and this is the development of the civilization during the Stone Age period or the post-Stone Age period. And once the iron gets developed, especially the copper, okay, at the mature stage of the Copper Age, or what we call it as the Chalcolithic Age. So at the developed or the mature stage at the Chalcolithic Age, we'll find also other elements which were being used, like silver, gold, copper, bronze. Okay, and all these evidences we'll get in the upcoming Harappan Age or the Indus Valley Civilization. Okay, so let us start with our today's session.